Well, good morning. My name is Mike Perdeni. For those who don't know me, a little bit about me. I'm a former Marine, and I'm also a retired law enforcement officer for 26 years. Recently retired 3 years ago and started my own business. And I'm actually heading to a job site now. I figured I had a little bit of time to record a video of my support with the sheriff candidate. So I support Jason Wyatt for multiple reasons. One thing that I see that nobody's talking about with the sheriff's department is the attrition rate from the current administration. And what I mean by that is that how many officers that leave that department and have left that department in the last few years, and the cost of that to the taxpayers of Dearborn County. You have to understand that whenever an officer leaves, a veteran officer, or an officer for a couple of years, that person has to be replaced by somebody maybe that doesn't have the experience as the veteran officers do. So the attrition rate costs the taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars. You think about it, if you hire somebody new, you've got to pay your administrators to come in and start an application process, polygraph. Once the officer's hired, then you got to outfit them with all new gear and send them to the academy for 3 months. For that 3 months, they're still pulling a salary from the sheriff's department, but they're not actually working the road and working in the community. So a good rule of thumb that I've always figured was it was a yearly salary of an officer to get somebody going. Now, what causes officers to leave departments? Well, there's multiple reasons. Like our department, they weren't the highest paid in the county. We lost officers to various departments because of pay and insurance, not necessarily because they were unhappy. There was a time, though, in my department that we had a 70% conviction rate, and that started pretty much from the chief down. So what makes a good chief or what makes a good sheriff? It's the years of experience, because the chief that I'm talking about, he was a 20-year veteran, the oldest veteran on our department, and he was appointed in that position, and he had stealing, being charged criminally and all that kind of good stuff. So just because they have years of service, when you hear, well, he's got 20 years in, he's got the most service, and that would make him a good leader. See, leaders they're not born, they're made. And what leadership training would you have? Do you even understand what it takes to be a good leader? Are politicians good leaders? Absolutely not. I have my own views on what I feel about politicians, and that's a whole other rant. But what makes a good leader? Well, I go back to like my military experience versus police work. Well, in the military, they've got to figure it out. 250 some years of training leaders and the schoolings that they have. Once you become an NCO, you got to go to school. Once you become a staff NCO, you got to go to school. In each stage, you're taught. You're taught the proper way of leadership. And in police work, you don't get that. You get appointed or elected, and then you're just supposed to man up and the troops are supposed to follow you. And the Marine Corps is pretty simple. It's mission accomplishment and troop welfare. As long as the job's getting done, then take care of your troops. And I think it's such a simple concept, but it's so overlooked. And that's why officers are leaving, is because of piss poor leadership, and it kills morale, and officers start complaining, and man, it just becomes a slippery slope. Law enforcement's its own entity that I never knew. I always thought it was kind of a band of brothers, but it's a very backstabbing career. Everyone just kind of backstabs each other. So that being said, Jason Wyatt, he's a 20-year veteran. He was on the sheriff's department for 20 years, and he was also in the military for 20 years. And he's going to bring that leadership skills with him from the military, and I think that's what Dearborn County needs. He's not a politician, And when I say politician, is look at all the the yard signs and the commercials and everyone's endorsements and everything. It snows out. You never hear from anybody, but all of a sudden it's election season, and somebody's going to tell you what threat level the roads are. Kind of like, a taxpayer of Dearborn County, as me, I don't need some grown man to tell me what the road conditions are, and or if I can or cannot drive on the roads. I pay for these roads with my hard work and my tax money, and I'm going to drive on them if I feel as though they're safe. I don't need a blowhard to tell me what threat level the snow is. And where were you 3 years ago? Where were you, a year ago? Now all of a sudden you got this big concern because you're acting like a politician. I truly believe that the grassroots movement here in Dearborn County is the right movement. I think the machine and the political machine, it needs to be broke up. And it's not how it was ever designed for, was to have these career politicians in, and we need some separation of that. But back to the sheriff's department. Jason White's your man. Pick up the phone, give him a call. Like I said, he's got the right leadership skills to run that department and maybe save the taxpayers of Dearborn County a little bit on the attrition rate. Do your research on that and see how many officers left in the last few years. It might surprise you. But that's just my 2 cents. Get out there and vote. And once again, my support's for Jason White 100%.